Hello and welcome to this all-new episode of the Fairfax Sports Report. I'm your host, Monica Moore, and we have a great show for you tonight. Since last we left you, 2 teams from the Northern region have won state championships in their respective sports, so you'll have to stay tuned to hear all about that. But before we get to that and more, let's thank the folks that helped make this show possible, our good friends at CCI Screen Printing. For all of your screen printing needs, you can contact them at 703-978-0257. And as always, just a quick reminder that we are on the web at www.fairfaxsportsnetwork.com, where you can get your latest scores and updates. Since we're in the postseason, I know that it's very important to know up to the minute what has happened in football, volleyball, field hockey. The sport's still going on right now. All right, and as always, I am delighted to be joined in the studio by Wynn Ellington. Welcome, Wynn.
Welcome, Monica. The delight is all mine.
Well, thank you. And before we jump into everything that we have to talk to you about tonight, just a couple of quick news and notes, something that we like to do at the beginning of the show to let you know about the happenings around the region. So first of all, congratulations to Claire Wagner. She is the new head women's lacrosse coach over at Herndon. She has just been named to this position, and she's no stranger to coaching in lacrosse. So we're looking forward to seeing how her Herndon team performs during the spring season. And also, before we move on, just want to congratulate one of the cross-country runners, Laura Pinkston, also over at Herndon. She has signed to run for Virginia Tech next season, and we've been following her throughout this season, and you probably remember me talking about her last year during the indoor track season. So congratulations to Laura. Now, as I said, we have lots to get into tonight, so the first thing we certainly want to talk about are some of the football games that went on around the region this past Friday, since we are in the playoffs, and when certainly we got to see a good one, the rematch of Herndon and Westfield on last Friday night. And I have to say that based on what happened during the regular season between those two teams, I was a little shocked that Herndon came out so much slower than they did in the regular season matchup.
Yeah, after seeing the rematch game in which Westfield dominated and went on and won 41-22, it's kind of hard to imagine that Herndon beat them early in the season. But you know, the big key to this game, I think, one of the major keys to this game was the Westfield offense, and and then getting that big lead, that 28-0 lead. They just put Herndon in a hole that Herndon never could climb out of. And Herndon was just, Westfield was just so much more sharp and focused than Herndon was. They came out and played more physical football, and they were just, they were the better team. They were better prepared, I thought, and it showed.
Well, speaking of that huge lead that Westfield racked up early on, particularly in the first half of the game, I think we have some highlights to show you just how Westfield won this game. So, Wynn, I'll leave it to you.
All right, here's Westfield and Jordan Anderson starting off the scoring. That's Jordan Anderson right up the middle, and then he cut over to his right, and he was pretty much untouched on that run. And then this was a fake punt by the Bulldogs. Dylan Doty takes the snap, and he gets the yardage necessary for the first down. And then this set up Jordan Anderson's second touchdown as he just bowls over the Herndon defenders. Westfield on top, 14-0. And here's his third touchdown run. He goes to the side, runs into some traffic, then cuts back in, and then he just finds open space, and he just outraces the Herndon defenders. And, he just shows his great instincts and vision on that run. Westfield dominating 21-0. All right, here's a long pass from Zach Osick. He hits his receiver, Trevor Johnson, downfield. But then, on the next ensuing play, Osick takes a hit, coughs up the ball, Westfield recovers. It was that kind of night for Herndon, especially in the first half. And here's Danny Finiak with the rollout. He hits his wide receiver, Evan Winfrey, right there. Winfrey makes the catch before momentum takes him out of bounds. Last play before the end of the first half. There's the pass over to Chris Medina. Medina then hits Zach Leach. Leach takes it into the end zone. A good, a positive note for Herndon going into the half. All right, and then Herndon starts off the second half strong, getting the sack on Finiak. Finiak loses the ball. Herndon recovers, and then this sets up the Devin Thompson touchdown as he beats the Westfield defenders to the corner. Herndon back in this ball game, but Westfield, once again, it's Jordan Anderson. You see him just break off tackles, and then he's able to get the ball across the plane before being tackled. And then that is Westfield's final touchdown, Andres Rodriguez. And here's the final touchdown of the game. However, Zach Osick throws up a beautiful arch to Nick Impellizzeri down the center of the field. Impellizzeri catches it, and Herndon finally gets some more points on the board. Westfield, though, wins it, as you can see there on the screen, 41 to 22. An exciting game. Well, the most exciting aspect about it was Jordan Anderson. He was, really the major story of the game. Herndon just could not stop him. He had 284 yards rushing on 25 carries. I saw another account where they had him for 299 yards rushing, but he had great blocking from his offensive line, and so when you give Jordan Anderson that kind of space, the Herndon defense was just unable to they were unable to really slow him down. And then on the flip side, Zach Osick, the Herndon quarterback, he had a good night, and I really like, he's just a junior,
right,
and I really think he'll be one of the premier quarterbacks in the Northern region next year. But Herndon really had not much of a running game at all. The Westfield defense really was solid up the middle and really made Herndon one-dimensional.
And I wanted to ask you, because I think one of the things that has really shocked me is, of course, we talked a lot about the fact that Herndon had this huge win over Westfield, and then their last two games in the regular season, they lost with a combined score of 120 to 58 to Oakton, a very good team we're going to talk about in just a minute, and then to Robinson. Then they have this loss. That's actually from the past three games, I think, those stats. And so what do you think happened? We saw this Herndon team very early on when they played South Lakes. We saw them against Westfield, and this just did not look like the club that beat Westfield 3 weeks earlier.
Well, we weren't at the earlier game, but just from what you were able to tell, I think Westfield proved that they were the better team, and throughout the course of the season, they proved that they were the better team. But I believe from their earlier matchup, what it appears is that just Westfield underperformed and Herndon played like the game of their life, and then Herndon did not really get much of a break after that game. They played Robinson the following week, and we had the interview with Coach Schaefer on the show, to talk to him about his team's upset of Westfield, and Robinson, they've had a tough season, but we've really seen their capabilities and their potential, especially with that running game. And it looks like they just weren't able to refocus to play an opponent with the caliber that Robinson has. I mean, they couldn't be overlooked. And I think, in that game, Robinson really had an excellent ground game with Fox and Murray. And so that stopped Herndon. They struggled defending against that. And then ending the season up with Oakton. Oakton, I think they've had such a great season, and I think, that really shows what a great team Oakton is. I think more than it really shows how bad Herndon is. That Oakton I think they were just motivated to finish up strong, and they were motivated to finish the regular season up undefeated.
Absolutely.
And I think Westfield was just highly motivated in trying to right the wrong from their earlier loss to Herndon.
Was my other question.
They just kind of took it. I think a lot of them they took it out on them. They were obviously a lot more physical. And it took Herndon a while to really get in. Once they got into the game, Westfield kind of had it out of reach at that point.
Well, my last question for you about this game, and the first half of the question isn't really a fair question for you. The second one I think is. But I was at the earlier game where Westfield played Oakton, and so I had already seen them earlier this season. And to me, they looked so much better against Herndon. I really feel like they're gelling really nicely at this point of the season. So I am curious, and the second half of the question is, you have a lot of knowledge about their team last year and where you think this team is compared to that team, even though comparisons are really never fair, and whether or not you think Westfield has a legitimate shot.
Well, I do not think Westfield will win the Northern Region. They are an excellent team, but I think in some of the comparisons between last year and this year, I think the running game is solid, if not better than last season. Last season they had a dual running attack with Brian Kennedy, who is one of the most impressive players I've seen in my years of doing this. I've never, rarely had I seen a player, demonstrate so much leadership and intensity, and he did it on both sides of the ball. He split time at running back with with Steve Tabbitt, and they kind of had a thunder and lightning mix going on. This year you have Jordan Anderson, who's more of a breakaway runner, kind of like when they had Evan Royster from a few years ago, kind of a bigger breakaway runner. I'm not saying I don't think he's quite as good as Anderson, although, by this, game, he's certainly putting up some similar numbers that that Royster has. So that's one difference is I think the running game is as good, if not better. Phinak's a good quarterback. He's not quite as good as Mike Glennon, but I think Phinyak will continue to improve, going into next year as well too. Now, I really don't think they have the targets at wide receiver that I've seen, this year than they had last year. They had a guy named Johnny Pickett last year who was really good. David Krutchko, who had come back from an incredible injury, and he's more of a big target type wide receiver. And then Randy Johns was another good wide receiver. They have quality wide receivers, but not really the kind of deep threats that they had last year as well. Of course, offensive line, they return. That's one area of the team where they return a lot of players. Then on the defensive side of the ball, I think one of the biggest differences is I think they're not quite as good defensively as they were last year. I think that may be the biggest difference. And I think a lot of that has to do, Kennedy was such a playmaker on defense, especially with his pass rush. And while they have good defensive players this year, I don't think they have they're not putting as much pressure on the quarterback from what I've seen. It's good, but it's not as good as it was last season. But when you have a playmaker like Kennedy, he was a major difference. And of course, I think a lot of it is just they are a veteran. They do have a lot of seniors starting this year, but last year this is their first year starting, whereas last year seniors, they had been through the fire a little bit more. So I think they benefited from that.
All right, Win Ellington and his encyclopedic knowledge here of Northern Region football. Well, before,
Casper. That's somebody who I'm highly impressed with on the.
I was really impressed with him.
And you did the interview with him,
well.
So I think that Westfield always has some good linebackers, and I think he follows in that tradition. He's not your outside blitzing linebacker that we've kind of seen in the past, but he's a good run stuffer up the middle, and he's real good at moving lateral too. But I think one thing that helped Herndon in this game kind of stage a mini comeback was they weren't able to get enough pressure on Ozick in the second half, and Ozick kind of woke up then. Which
is going to be very important if they do end up facing Oakton. They've got one of the best rushing quarterbacks probably in the region. So
that's going to be that rematch is going to be interesting. And to follow up about Ozick a little bit more, I was we did the Herndon South Lakes game, but I was very impressed with him and very impressed with how he has improved.
I completely agree.
How he has improved this season. So I think that's and we've seen some of his stats in earlier games too. So I think he's definitely been a positive story and
has a lot returning. I think Devin Thompson's only a junior.
Yeah, he's only a junior, and I think one thing that Westfield did effectively was really they minimized Devin Thompson in this. He was not as big of a factor in this game, so they stopped Devin Thompson. So that was a positive thing that I thought Westfield did in defending against Herndon in this last game, both offensively, and he's a factor on defensive, defense as well too. So.
Well, before we leave this game, we do want to show you our player of the game. We're doing players of the game this week instead of district players of the week. And so Jordan Anderson, of course, we've talked so much about him, but one thing we haven't mentioned, you see his season stats there, where he is in at least one more game to play this season, almost 1,800 yards, 27 touchdowns for Jordan Anderson. Well, we've already talked a little bit about this Oakton club. We've been previewing this a little bit, but of course Oakton had their matchup in the playoffs this week. And, when I don't know what your thoughts were about this game, but Oakton seemed to, I think the score was something like 14-7 at halftime against South County, but then Oakton clearly took over during the second half.
Yeah, well, that is, I don't know how to explain it, but that seems to be a trademark of Oakton. They always seem to be a much better team in the second half.
Kind of wake up later on.
We saw it against. Well, they struggled a little bit against Madison in the opener, but then later on in the season when we covered them,
and the Westfield
and against Robinson,
they had a much better second half as well. Then. So
the Westfield game too was one of the games that they really got
That's
up
right.
to right from the beginning. They were very outstanding. So they are certainly capable of coming out with that strong start. But against South County, it looked like, and the South County defense, I think you have to give a lot of credit to, because in the second quarter they shut down this Oakton offense, which has so many weapons in it. We've talked a lot about that, but I think that you have to credit the South County defense for that. But then Oakton really came alive after halftime.
yeah, they really. I mean, look here, like Chris Coyer. He's 123 yards rushing on 15 carries, and he always does a good job of distributing the ball, whether it's to Trey Watts or Johnny Meadows. Watts, he doesn't put up a whole lot of incredible numbers, except when it comes to touchdown totals. He really seems to find the end zone a lot. I've mentioned this before. They use him very effectively as both a running back and a slot back, and they kind of have a little bit more of they have that duo rushing attack as well with Johnny Meadows. Not quite as big as Trey Watts, but he's so good and effective at bouncing to the outside. And another player for Oakton who I have been impressed with. I'm not quite sure what kind of game he had, but I'm sure he made an incredible presence. Was their tight end Reynolds, who big kid, 6'7", 220 pounds. He's always a really good target for Coyer on those 10 and 15 yard pass patterns.
Now, of course, some of the big news this week was that Chris Coyer was named the Concord District Offensive Player of the Year. And when I wanted to ask you what you thought about that selection, because you've seen a lot of these Concord District players. There's Torian Pace, Jordan Anderson, lots of players in the Concord District. But Coyer's certainly a special player in the district. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, there is some, Jordan Anderson and Torian Pace put up, I think they deserve some votes. They obviously deserve some votes as well. But I really can't. I have to agree with it. His running and he's not quite putting up the kind of numbers that we may see in the passing department that we may see like Bryn Renner or Thompson or Cole Walter, some of the other players. But just the way he leads the offense, and he doesn't make many mistakes at all. But his running just seems to. Defenses just can't. When he makes those first downs, it's like he kind of breaks their will a little. He breaks their will a little bit. So I think that is a good selection. And kind of looking at this game too. We don't have a whole lot of defensive individual defensive statistics from this game, but one stat that really jumps out at me is Eric Dorsey.
That jumped out at me too, that he was limited to such a small number of yards because he's been outstanding all season. And I agree with you. The minute I saw that, I thought credit has to go to the Oakton defense. And Aaron Andrews.
Two interceptions of Andrews as well. Although Anderson did throw for 200 yards, and he had ran for 83 yards too, which is impressive. So I'm sure those two picks played a big part in the outcome of this game. But Eric Dorsey had just been Mr. Everything for South County, and when you limit him to just 44 yards, that is the way you defend against them.
Absolutely. He's certainly a player that you have to key in on when you're playing South County. And so a disappointing end to a great career, I think, for Eric Dorsey, because he has certainly been one of the standouts this year in the region. So that is the Oakton game. Moving right along as we're going to take you through all 4 of the Division 6 playoff games from last week. And so our next one is Chantilly versus Annandale. We talked a lot about this because this was one that we were both really excited about winning. And they put up some big numbers in this game, 47-38 being the outcome here. And so lots of offense in this game. And then Torian Pace, we've already talked about him, but I don't know who can stop him. He just makes it look easy. And of course, I think I completely skipped our players of the game for the Oakton game. Glad I was reminded about that. They're up on the screen. So I do want to give congratulations to Trey Watts and Jonathan Meadows, the 2 sensational running backs over there for Oakton. You see combined, they had 4 total touchdowns, leading the Oakton offense along with Chris Coyer, who we talked a lot about. Now we'll move on to that Chantilly-Annandale game. I get a little ahead of myself. I get so excited about everything we have to talk about. But there you see the score. So lots of offense going on in the Chantilly-Annandale game. And for Chantilly, you have to give a lot of credit to Torian Pace because he was just the sensational athlete he has been all season.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine that somebody had a better game than Jordan Anderson did this past Friday night, but Torian Pace certainly topped him in terms of total yardage, running for over 300 yards on 35 carries. So he was, and catching a 52-yard touchdown reception. So he was, quite the workhorse for the Chantilly offense. And but that's what they do best. Just give it to Torian and let him run up the middle. They mix it with McGrath, a good bit too. But that's their bread and butter. Is that Chantilly rushing attack. And Annandale they were unable to stop it. But we both talked about how this game did have potential for an upset. Annandale coming into the game with a hot hand, winning 5 in a row, and then end up tying for West Springfield for the top spot in the Patriot District. So we thought there could be an upset, but no, they just Torian Pace, was ensured, and the Chantilly offensive line ensured that did not happen.
But I think in talking about this game, you can't take anything away from Kason Kynes because he has had such an amazing year in the Patriot District for his Annandale team and has really appeared to be the heart of that team. So that's going to be a huge loss for Annandale. I'm not quite sure who his backup quarterback is because he's been on the field for Annandale. We've talked about this before too. He pretty much never leaves the field. He's on special teams, plays defense, plays offense. And so I don't know who they will have coming in. They'll certainly have back Melvin Robinson, who has been a great receiver for them this year.
You haven't been to any of the Annandale games this year, have you?
I haven't.
Melvin Robinson is somebody who I really, I'm sorry I didn't get to see him play this year because in this past game, he caught 4 passes for 163 yards, and a touchdown. But his yards per catch just seem to be incredible, and so. I'm predicting he's been one of the premier players this year, but I'm predicting he'll be in the top 5 from what we see coming into next season. But Kason Kynes, as you mentioned before, he passed for 317 yards in this game and rushed for 47. He's a dual threat quarterback, and he could be the best dual threat quarterback in the whole region. But and that's the kind of quarterbacks that Annandale seems to produce. They had they had Nathan Cartagena before him. He may not have put up numbers this big, but he was also very much dual threat within himself. So we'll just see if Coach Dick Adams produces another one there for us. But kind of a ground game shootout. Well, ground game for Chantilly, Annandale through the air.
Well, and that has been Chantilly's game all year. Strip matter doesn't really pass a lot. So again, I talked about this last week that was one of my questions when they get further along into the playoffs, whether or not that might be an issue for them. But Torian Pace so far has been a great workhorse for them and has really put up some great numbers. And speaking of Torian Pace, I will not make this mistake again. We will show you our player of the game for the Chantilly-Annandale game. We showed you Jordan Anderson's season stats. Now you can see Torian Pace's to compare. He's got a few more yards, a few less touchdowns, but those two definitely the very strong running backs in the region. And there are others as well, just over at Oakton, over at Robinson. There's 2 that really share a lot of the carries, so aren't putting up the numbers that Pace and Anderson are, but doesn't take away from what great running backs they've been. So now, not necessarily saving the best for last, but this West Springfield-Woodson game really put up the offensive numbers. When you see this score, you're going to be shocked if you haven't already seen 47-38. A lot of offense going on. You certainly expect that from West Springfield.
Well, what I'm kind of confused about, okay, it's the score is identical to the Chantilly-Annandale game. 47-38.
Oh, maybe that is an error. I'm not quite sure if that is right.
But anyway, yeah. I mean, this game lasted 4 hours. And it's the highest scoring playoff game in their 94-year in the 94-year history. I remember a few years ago, West Springfield and West Potomac played to an 81-74 game. They didn't quite make it that high, but it looks like this is West Springfield football right here. It was a
shootout, and may the best team win.
Yeah, they came out on top on this one, but it looks like they continue to rely on their rushing attack a little bit more each day. each game. Dan Collins, 351 yards rushing on 26 carries. He has done a fine job filling in for Brendan Bailey.
He really is, because, I mean, West Springfield has certainly had their share of injuries this year, and some of them really difficult injuries. Now we have the correct score for you. We're a little worried about that last score. This is the shootout score we promised you, the 72-47, seeing all of that offense that both teams put up on the scoreboard on Friday night. And again, just getting back to Dan Collins, I think a lot of people probably thought that injury to Brandon Bailey would be very serious for West Springfield. Certainly they lost Scott Van Buren earlier in the season. He was the heart and soul of their defense, but Dan Collins just stepping up like he has been very impressive for them. And they seem to just have so many offensive options. We've talked about that a great deal this season, and that has served them really well in the absence of Brandon Bailey.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the last two games, Collins rushed for 619 yards and 6 touchdowns. And hey, let's not forget, the fellow leading that offense, Bryn Renner, 20 of 31 for 274 yards and 2 touchdowns, rushing for 55 yards on 11 carries. Kind of, human numbers for Renner, but he still does a great job. And
he's still battling that injury. He's not 100% healthy.
Right.
And so, he could be putting up even better numbers than that. But I think you do have to give Renner a lot of credit, because since that injury that he suffered against South County to his left shoulder, so not his throwing shoulder, but still a very significant injury, he's still continued to put up great numbers.
And then his favorite target, this guy's kind of really seems to come on as the season has progressed, but T.J. O'Connell, who's just an underclassman as well, 12 receptions for 179 yards. I don't know how that's kind of interesting. I think it's kind of interesting how O'Connell has developed into his main target as the season has progressed with all the wide receivers they got there. Tobin, the main one who the guy's been his main target the last few seasons. Andy Stallings,
right,
and then also Fabrice Kambinga.
Well, and I think coming into the season, too, everyone did think that the big targets would be Stallings, Tobin, and Bailey. And O'Connell has stepped up, and now with Dan Collins. So that's a huge plus for Bill Renner.
It wasn't the Woodson offense. They had a good game as well. Connor Riley, he has had one heck of a season, 326 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. Max Wazenager, 6 receptions for 107 yards, one of the best receivers we've seen across the region this year. And then a guy who is playing football for the first time this season. Coach Taylor recruited him out of algebra class. Kirk Lewis, 3 catches for 143 yards and 3 touchdowns. Each catch went for a touchdown. Very, very impressive. A few bright spots for the West Springfield defense. Linebacker Albie Sabu Gayan, who I've seen play before, and I've been pretty impressed with his play over the last few seasons. He returned a fumble for a 20-yard touchdown.
I think those stories are always so great, too, when a player's been recruited to come and play. And certainly, athletes are athletes. And so if you're good at one sport, a lot of times you're very good at other sports, too. But that's always such a nice bonus for teams. And Coach Taylor said after that game that he was going to look around the hallways and see who else he could find to come and help out his Woodson club next year, because certainly having their quarterback, Connor Riley, come back next year will be huge for them. But I think losing Max Wazenager, who we have enjoyed watching.
Riley's just a junior?
I think Riley is just a junior.
Okay.
I could be wrong about that. Yeah. I could very well be wrong. But Weisenager, certainly a senior. We've enjoyed watching him play, and he's a baseball standout as well. So we will get to see him play a little more before his career is over.
I add a little bit more about West Springfield this year. They, they've had high expectations coming into this season. They finished the regular season at 7-3. I'm sure they wanted to, finish I think they probably expect to finish a little bit better than that. But one thing, they battled the injury bugs this season.
Right.
Now, we thought about, Renner missed that game against T.C. Williams, which I think really hurt them. And then
they might have been Patriot District champions had it not been for that game.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Collins has really come along, but, before they were able to really get him in his groove, I think, with Brendan Bailey out, that hurt them a little bit. And then on the defensive side of the ball, linebacker Scott Van Buren, who's been out for the season. He has, I remember him from last season, and he's really a key defender. So that loss has hurt them, on defense.
All right, well, before we stop talking about Division VI football for a little while, we're going to show you our player of the game from the West Springfield-Woodson game. You're probably not surprised, as you have heard. Wynn and I have been very impressed with the numbers this young man has put up over the last few weeks. And you see in the third quarter alone, he had 184 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, very important for his team, as Woodson was not going away. They put up a good fight, but just couldn't overcome the offensive numbers that West Springfield was able to put up. All right, so now let's take a short break from football and talk a little bit about volleyball, because if you remember from last week, we were heading into the region semifinals, and I told you that what those matchups would be, and I predicted that our Northern Region final would be Chantilly and Westfield, and sure enough, that's what it ended up being on Saturday night at Centerville High School. Westfield and Chantilly squared off for the 4th time this season, and Chantilly got off to an exceptionally quick start, and you see the quick set there to Christy Harper, number 13 for the Chargers. She has really stepped up for them this season. And then Westfield, they're trying to set something up. But again, Chantilly had an answer for almost everything. You see Kohler there for Westfield with the big hit, and then Chantilly going to Christy Harper again in the middle. And there you see Kohler. I'm sorry, that was Kelly Murray, number 14 or 15. The numbers are a little hard to see. That's definitely Kelly Murray. She's their big middle blocker for Westfield. And with Sammy Spees struggling a little bit, there you see her there with the free ball. You might be wondering where she's been. It was her teammates that had to step up. And Claire Lanigan there, you see trying to get there, but she just couldn't for her team. There's Sammy Spees. She only had 4 kills on the night. That was one of them that you just saw. But Allison Williams came on exceptionally strong for the Chargers during the 3rd set. We're going to see another highlight from her in just a second. You'll see why, there she is, why it is that she was the Northern Region Tournament MVP, because she was a big reason that Chantilly was able to seal the game. And then you see Christy Harper there had the little tip at the end of the game to give Chantilly their 2nd Northern Region Championship title in this century. They also won in 2004. But that game was completely all Chantilly. I think Westfield very disappointed after that game, because they've lost to Chantilly 3 times coming into that game, and they were really hoping to be able to put something together. And the big reason, Sammy Spees, their player who has been so amazing for them, she is the Northern Region Player of the Year, only had 4 kills. She did have 9 digs. She was certainly contributing on the defensive end, but Westfield not able to get anything going. And then Chantilly on the other end of it just has so much depth. And one thing that really amazed me about that game is coming into it, I think a lot of people really expected for Allison Williams and Samantha Reeves to be the big hitters that Westfield was going to have to cover. And then in the first set, it was Jamie Gorman, number 10 for the Chargers, who came up so huge from the outside hitter position. In fact, she earned a spot on the all-tournament team. That was a big surprise for Chantilly, certainly something that I think is going to be very important for them during the playoffs. They had 4 girls who had 5 or more kills in that game, and that type of depth I think is going to be very important as they progress on through the playoffs, start playing some other teams. But speaking of those playoffs, we are already into the playoffs for volleyball. And the first 2 games, quarterfinal games for our Northern Region teams, were last night, and I am happy to report to you that both Westfield and Chantilly very successful. First of all, Chantilly played Hanover, and they were a little worried about that game because Hanover has a young woman who is being nationally recruited, Paige Johnston, who everyone in the area is very familiar with. She's supposed to be signing with Penn State next week. Of course, Penn State, the school where Megan Shiflett is playing, Langley's all-star setter from last season. But Chantilly came out, made very quick work in 3 sets, winning against Hanover and advancing on. And then Westfield also may not have been a surprise to some, might have been a surprise. They defeated Mills Godwin, the number 1 team out of the Central Region, in 3 sets as well. And I'm happy to report that Sammy Spees definitely righted whatever was going on with her on Saturday. She had 19 kills to lead her team. And I talked about the depth with Chantilly, but I was very impressed because it wasn't just Spees. She had a very good night against Mills Godwin, but some of her teammates also just putting up the really big numbers, and so that bodes very well for them. So they are both still in the state tournament. So we want to show you the upcoming games because both of those teams will be back in action tomorrow night, or Thursday, I guess a little in the afternoon at 5 p.m. Chantilly will be the first game for our region teams versus Albemarle. These games are taking place in Richmond at VCU's Siegel Center. And then you have Westfield versus Lansdowne, also same location at 7 p.m. So best of luck to our two remaining Northern Region teams that are participating in the volleyball state tournament. Hope they both do really well. And then of course the state championships will be coming up. We'll keep you apprised of everything going on with volleyball. But now let's turn back to football because we told you everything that happened in Division 6 this week. Now we want to turn and talk about what happened in Division 5. And
I got a volleyball question.
oh, please, I love your volleyball questions.
Is depth Chantilly's greatest asset, would you say?
Absolutely. I think that they're such a hard team to defend against because if you're focusing on Allison Williams, who I would say is their strongest hitter at this point, you're not focusing on Samantha Reeves and Christy Harper and Jamie Gorman. And those players can get into enough trouble, get you into a lot of trouble as well. And so I think that that is a huge thing that Chantilly has going for them. And they only have 3 seniors. Almost all of those girls are going to be back next year. And so Chantilly, undefeated so far on this season, next season could be even better.
So is it always kind of like Westfield is in football where you never rebuild, you always reload? Do they have that kind of,
I think it's harder.
Is that part of their team character, identity rather?
I think it's harder in volleyball. And in fact, this has been a huge story for Chantilly because they had a very young team. These girls were freshmen. They were playing on the varsity team. Last year as sophomores, they struggled a little bit because they were so young. But now they're getting to the point where they're really starting to gel as a team. And having all of that experience early on has been very important for them. I think volleyball, it's much harder.
Programs go through more of a roller coaster.
I think that that's correct, yes.
Okay, and now Chantilly's at the top of the roller coaster.
Chantilly is, and I think they're going to stay there. So let's show you what the end of season Northern Region volleyball rankings that we've come up look like. You probably won't be surprised at the order based on what we just told you, but Chantilly and Westfield 1, 2, and then Herndon and Stonebridge, the other two teams that competed in the semifinals of the Northern Region tournament. Centerville there in the number 5 position had a tough end of the season for Centerville, but they're always such a strong program, so I would expect for them to be back next year very strong as well. All right, so now if you want to turn back to football, we'll tell you a little bit about what happened with Division 5. And some of the Division 5 teams, speaking of undefeated, I said Chantilly undefeated in volleyball. We have Edison and Stonebridge still undefeated in football. Now Edison, their first playoff matchup was against Lee, a team that they had beat by quite a bit during the regular season. And although they seem to have some trouble in this game with some of their special teams and things like that, still the dominant Edison team we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I mean, they even beat Lee by more points than they did during the regular season, winning 37 to 7, and whereas earlier they beat them 35 to 14. But you know, they had to play this game without, they went into this game with some injuries, and their hard-fought win over Chantilly. Angus Harper, Josh Page, and Frank Figura, and Stefan Robertson too. They had all been injured, so they went into this game a little bit banged up. Lee may have sensed that, and Lee actually ended up scoring first on a long touchdown pass from quarterback Greg Lopez. But it seems like with a player like Stefan Robertson, he answered right back with a 64-yard touchdown run of his own. And then after that pass by Lopez, it looked like the Edison defense really held strong together, intercepting Lopez 3 times, and then also limiting Lee running back Jasmine Williams to 63 yards on 18 carries.
And it's very interesting because you asked me the question about depth in Chantilly. We've been seeing a lot of injuries lately on the football front as well, but to teams that have such great depth that it's not necessarily impacting them with West Springfield, with Edison. Now, I don't know how this will hurt Edison if they advance on, not to look too far ahead, but if they were to face Stonebridge in the championship game for the Northern Region, having those injuries. Stonebridge is not healthy either, but Stonebridge probably has more depth than Edison has.
Yeah, the Stonebridge is without Patrick Thompson, but you look into this. Depth is a strength for Edison, for Edison as well. So it's a good, I think a good lead-in from when we were talking about Chantilly's volleyball team, and a lot of that depth is, many teams would love to have Stephon Robertson as their main running back, and to an extent he is there. But when you got Angus Harper, and both of these guys have been putting up rushing totals this season of running for averaging like 15 or 16 yards per carry.
Well, and not to mention the Washington brothers, who may not put up the numbers, but they're exciting players to watch. I mean, they'll get 60 yards on a punt return, or they'll have these amazing catches with defenders hanging on them.
I mean, Edison also scores many of their points not on regular offensive plays from the line of scrimmage, and the Washington brothers have a lot to do with that. Both Corey and Christian. They return punts. They return a tremendous number of punts and kickoffs. And then also, interceptions as well. If they don't run the pass back, then they're able to, at least set the offense up in strong field position. But this Edison team is I think they're a little bit more physical than they were last year. They're very athletic. They're very athletic. They combine strength and fitness along that defensive front rather. And I think one of the main players was somebody who was somebody who got hurt, Josh Page. He kind of exemplifies that. And then another defensive lineman, Blair, I thought kind of exemplifies that as well.
Well, since you brought this up, I'm kind of curious, talking about the Edison team last year, because they lost Ben Barber, which was a huge loss. That'd be a huge loss to any program. His little brother filling in now in the quarterback position. Did you expect this Edison team to be this good this year?
Yes, I did.
You did.
This is not really a surprise to me. I just remember. I thought they returned a lot of key players back, and they don't play the toughest schedule in the world either. So that kind of helped.
They beat Chantilly.
Yeah, they did. They beat this season. They did have they won some close games. So credit them there. But for a while they've been winning decisively over their other national district, national district opponents. Now they did play a tough out of district schedule, and they, to their credit, as mentioned, they won some close games, and they came through that.
Well, certainly that win over West Springfield earlier this season, a very impressive one for the Eagles, and then the win over Chantilly. But certainly not, the district is what the district is, and nothing that they can do about that. But I have been very impressed with them, and certainly didn't know coming into the season. I think one of the questions for them was how Levi Barber would fill in at the quarterback spot, and he has been very, very good there, I think.
Yeah, he's been very good. I think they had a quarterback a few years ago named Sean Lloyd, and then they had Ben Barber was his main target. When Lloyd was a senior and Barber was a junior. Then they moved Ben to quarterback his year, his senior year, and then now they moved his younger brother Levi to quarterback his senior. But I think when they had Sean Lloyd, he was more of your strong arm drop back passer, and we saw him have a very good game in the Northern Region All-Star game. But even with Levi Barber there too, he may not put up quite the numbers that Sean Lloyd did, but they still have so many weapons to mix it around with.
Agreed. So let's show you who we have selected for our player of the game from this Edison-Lee matchup, and it's Stephon Robertson playing with the injury, and you see the statistics he put up on offense and defense, 154 yards on only 6 carries, 3 touchdowns, and then 11 tackles, 5 of which were solo tackles. So Stephon Robertson injured, playing offense, playing defense, really doing everything he can to help his Edison team at this stage of the season. So our second game that we're going to talk about in the Division 5 playoffs, a rematch also from earlier this season when Stonebridge played Thomas Jefferson. And this score, again, Stonebridge has been very impressive all season, 58-7. So didn't defeat Thomas Jefferson by as much as they did during the regular season when it was 70-7, but still a very decisive win for the Bulldogs. And when you're smiling over there.
I'm just thinking about Jim's comments earlier after the Stonebridge Thomas Jefferson game. He said, "Look out for that science fair," and I'm like thinking, that science fair is coming up here. So, but I don't know. Stonebridge may have a very good science fair of their own. So, but Stonebridge has so many. We haven't seen them play, but they have so many weapons as well. We've seen Allen and Prince. They've both been just finding their way into the end zone many times. But this time they had a new running back playing. A guy who looks like he didn't
Right.
get as many carries. Let's give him some credit. Marcus Harris, 100.
Yeah, he's their leading rusher.
105 yards rushing on 9 attempts. So over 10 yards a carry. But just Thomas Jefferson, they just weren't able to match him. But they've had a quarterback named Ben Daly who had a pretty good game. He threw for 140 yards, completed 13 of 21 passes, but he's passed for over 1,300 yards this season.
Right, he's had a
as
good
rusher.
year.
So he's had a good year, even though they had to finish their season up playing Stonebridge and were just completely overmatched.
But, and to try to find a silver lining, because I think this has to be said, though, that it's a pretty big deal for them to make the playoffs.
Yes.
And I think this is the second time they've done it this century, and they haven't really had a lot of success there. So I think it's a huge thing for Thomas Jefferson to make it into the playoffs. I think you do have to give a lot of credit to Ben Daly, their quarterback. And so, while the score is a little lopsided there, I think Thomas Jefferson should certainly hang their heads high and feel like they have had a very respectable season this year in the region.
Yeah, you're right about that. Another stat here is we read off a lot of their running backs. Give credit to some of their offensive players, but the Stonebridge defense held Thomas Jefferson to negative 89 yards rushing. So I think that's when you hold a team to negative rushing yards, you're going to win the game. It goes without saying. Thomas Jefferson, their lone touchdown of the game was Mike Howard scored it. He scored, and he's been Daly's main. He caught an 11-yard touchdown pass from Daly. He's been Daly's main target all season. 442 yards receiving on 31 catches. And
Stonebridge holding them to just, I think, 60 yards of total offense, 60 or 70 yards of total offense. So a very good day for the Stonebridge defense. That is not surprising because the Stonebridge defense has been completely outstanding so far this year. And before we go, again, we want to congratulate our player of the game. We haven't talked a lot about this young man. I don't think we talked about him today at all. We've talked about him some this season. He was standing in for Patrick Thompson as the starting quarterback for Stonebridge. Patrick Thompson did not play, and you see the numbers that John Bladell put up. 8 of 17 passes for 188 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. So that's been a really important thing for them, I think, to have him step in for Patrick Thompson. Patrick Thompson has had several injuries this season, so having a very strong backup quarterback has been really important for them, and John Bladell has filled that role very nicely. Moving right along, we're going to talk about the game that was probably the closest. It might have been the best game. We weren't there, of course. We were at the Westfield-Herndon game. But just looking at the score, it appears that the Mount Vernon-Washington Lee game, a nail-biter in some sense when you look at some of the other scores that we've had. Mount Vernon winning with 1 touchdown, 17-10. But when this one looks like it might have been the most exciting game of the night, really.
Yeah, definitely the most competitive playoff game from this past weekend. Mount Vernon defeats Washington and Lee for the second time this season, and they've just had a great year. Running back Brian Green, he had 110 yards rushing on 11 carries. So Washington Lee had tied the game, but then Mount Vernon scored the winning touchdown with 2:22 remaining on the clock. It was a Robert Coleman touchdown run.
And Mount Vernon, they haven't lost since they played Edison way back in September. And again, we talked a little bit about the National District schedule and some of the teams that they play on that schedule. But this, I think, is a very good year so far that Mount Vernon has put together. And certainly it's not over yet. They have at least one more game coming up in the semifinals. But I think Tom Glenn has to just be really happy with how well these young men have played and what they've accomplished this year. I think, that every year sets the bar higher for the next year. And so that this is really important for them.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. It's not over yet. They have a playoff game this week. It could be Cinderella. Could be forget the palace. She could be residing on Mount Vernon this weekend with their matchup against Stonebridge. So we'll see.
Well, and
I think I got Disney stories mixed up. But anyway, you get my message.
And Washington Lee as well. I think that this, I talked a little bit about Thomas Jefferson, but I think this is a great accomplishment for them too, to make it into the playoffs. And this was a very competitive game. It could have gone either way. It looks like they battled back into it and really made Mount Vernon fight for it. And so I think a lot of congratulations have to also be sent over to Washington Lee.
Definitely, I totally agree with you.
Good. I like it when that happens.
Congratulations to the Generals on a great season.
So our player of the game, you probably won't be surprised about this one either. We have to give our kudos to the quarterback for the majors, Brian Green, senior. He will not be returning for the majors, but as you said, Win, he's got at least one more game to play. He rushed for 110 yards on 11 carries, scored a touchdown. Very important when you win by one touchdown. And then you see during the regular season, he had 2 touchdowns when they played Lee earlier. One game remaining in football to tell you about, and it was the Madison-Yorktown matchup. And when you called this one, when we had our pick'ems last week, I think you picked Madison. I think I picked Yorktown. So congratulations. And this was not the close game.
No, never would I gloat on my picks, though, Monica.
I appreciate it. You're a bigger person than I am. We have established that so far this season, I think.
But 9.5.
But Madison winning this one 28-7. So they will be the team that advances on to continue playing next week. And our player of the game for this one, we want to congratulate Will Cebulski for his outstanding effort. You see there he scored 2 touchdowns in this effort, one during the first quarter and then that 80-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter to help Madison get this big win to help them advance on in the Division 5 playoffs.
You know, Yorktown had beaten them 23-7 in the regular season, and I kind of thought that was early in the season, and I kind of thought Madison was a better team than that after seeing the kind of game that they gave Oakton, and and we've seen that through some of their scores down the stretch winning some big games down the stretch this season. I thought that they would avenge their earlier loss.
All right, well, before we leave football, we still have a lot more to talk about because we do want to show you what our top 10 rankings look like at the end of the first week of the playoffs. So, Win, I will let you do the honors.
All right, number 1, Oakton. Last week they were number 1. Number 2, Stonebridge. Last week, number 2. Number 3, Edison. Last week, number 3. Everything same as last week. Number 4, Westfield.
A lot of changes.
Number 5, Chantilly. Number 6, West Springfield. Number 7, Mount Vernon, making the jump from number 10. Number 8, Annandale. They fall back from number 7. South County remains the same, putting up a good fight against Oakton, ending the season at number 9. Woodson drops from 8 to 10.
Well, I don't know if that makes us look lazy or smart, the fact that we don't have a lot of changes this week in our rankings. But there is what they look like. Now, before we leave football, we want to take a look at what the games are coming up and tell you what our picks are. So first of all, you see the Division 6 matchups. Now, who do you have in this Chantilly-Westfield matchup?
All right, this is going to be an incredible matchup. This is going to be a battle of the tailbacks. Westfield's Jordan Anderson against Chantilly's Torian Pace. I'm going to go with a road dog on this one and upset Chantilly Chargers.
Well, I'm going to pick Westfield, so that'll give us a little bit to talk about next week because I've been very impressed with them. I was at that game, very impressed with how they played last week. Now, West Springfield-Oakton, we might see a lot more offensive numbers. Who do you have on that one?
All right, quarterback duel, Chris Coyer against Bryn Renner. This is going to be a real good one. Oakton's defense, though, is far superior. I'm going with the Cougars.
Completely agreed on that one. So we talked about these majors who have been very impressive this season. Do you think they have a chance against Stonebridge?
No, I do not. I do not. It will not be Cinderella's ball this week, and Stonebridge Bulldogs win.
Well, if you don't think it's going to be Cinderella's ball, then I have to presume you're picking Edison in the last game.
I am picking Edison in the last game. I think Madison will give them a good fight, but Edison just has too many weapons. The Eagles will fly on Friday.
We'll see how those picks turn out next week when we tell you what's going to be happening in the region finals. But before we go, as I told you, as I promised at the start of the show, 2 state champions have been crowned that we want to talk to you about. So first of all, the cross-country championships were held this past weekend, and there you see your Oakton Cougars from the northern region winning first place, and you see how the other 3 region teams did who competed in the state meet. Great showing from all of our northern region teams that participated. And then in the girls event, Jefferson finishing 3rd. Midlothian did win, as I predicted on last week's show. That probably wasn't a huge leap there, but there you see how the girls did. And then the individual results, a lot of people in the region having good days. Liule Degfe there, you see 3rd place. He was the top finisher in the boys. And then Erica Howells from Woodson. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, Monica, you haven't said anything about this young woman all season. Well, she transferred in, she moved here from New York. She's been injured, but really had her breakout performance. If you're gonna have it, the state championships is the place to have it. And then Sarah Stites, the freshman from Thomas Jefferson, finishing 4th, so lots more ahead from her. So that was one state championship that I wanted to tell you about. The other one happened in cheerleading this past weekend, also on Saturday. The Stonebridge Bulldogs won first place, and you see not far behind them was Fairfax. So the Northern Region teams finishing 1-2. In fact, the last 5 of the 6 state champions have been from the Northern Region. Stonebridge has 3, Chantilly has the one from last year, and then of course West Springfield. And so the Northern Region represented very well by the cheerleaders in the area. Now, finally, I want to tell you a little bit about field hockey, because I promised that last Wednesday, the Northern Region Final was taking place, so did want to let you know that Lake Braddock was the team that won 2-0. Diane Miller's team coming up very big during the second half. You see Anne-Marie Gambasia in the 32nd minute and Katie Klatt in the 41st minute scored the 2 goals for the Bruins, making them the Northern Region champions. Both of those teams competing now in the state tournament. Those games also coming up tomorrow. We told you about the volleyball games tomorrow. So first you see that Westfield's going to be playing Thomas Dale at the National Training Center in Virginia Beach at 1 p.m. And then Lake Braddock's matchup is going to be against Maggie Walker Governor School at 3 p.m. also at the National Training Center. Now, Northern Region teams have not fared very well in the state tournament as of late, and one thing that's attributed to is the fact that the teams down at the beach play on the turf field, and that's a much faster game. The teams here are not used to that, so they've had a little trouble in the past, but we'll see how our teams fare this year in the state tournament and keep you up to date about everything that's happening there. Well, Lynn, once again, we have made a mad dash through everything going on in the region. Any last thoughts you want to add?
The turf hurts us. The whole turf. We're blaming it on the turf.
We are blaming it on the turf. That is my
turf.
explanation.
Okay.
You heard it here. We're blaming it on the turf.
Vince Lombardi would not have given that excuse, Monica.
All right, well, on that note, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Again, want to thank the folks at CCI Screen Printing, 703-978-0257. And again, don't forget to check us out on the web. Our 2 games of the week this week will be West Springfield and Oakton and Chantilly and Westfield. And then, of course, we were also at the volleyball Northern Region Championship. So please go to our website to get the times that those shows will be airing. All right, well, join us next week. We'll tell you everything else that's happened in the region.